Today is March 31st, 2021. My name is Anne Shi. I'm interviewing Mr. Wen Ti Wen on behalf of the He's an Asian American Archive. This interview is part of the special collection Racial Justice and Civic Engagement. Thank you so much, Mr. Wen, for taking your time to document this very important time in history with the HAA. And to start, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you came to Houston?
My name is Wen Ting Nguyen. I'm Vietnamese American. I came to the United States with my parents, part of the HO program, sponsored by United States. My father was the prisoner of war. He fought for the South during the Vietnam War, and afterward, they captured him and put him to re-education camp. And because of that, American have a program to sponsor us to go to the United States, and that's how I came able to come to Houston, Texas.
Thank you for sharing that. And can you share with us some of the memories about your upbringing?
My upbringing, I don't have a lot of relatives here. So growing up, raised in the Hispanic and African American community. So my knowledge of their culture is more than my own culture. But as I became an adult, I feel like there was an identity crisis that I have. So that's why I want to reach out and learn as much as I can about the culture. I live in the A-Leaf community, and this is why I stay here because there's so much culture here that I want to learn. Plus, the food is great. So I stay here because of that. And growing up, my friends are pretty much international. I don't just hang out with a particular group of Asian crowd or anything like that. I hang out with everybody because I believe in multicultural society that we're living right now. So I embraced it.
And can you share with us a little bit about the neighborhood you grew up in and then the demographics of that neighborhood?
Um, Growing up, now I live in apartments, so we have, I have like Vietnamese friends, but I primarily goes to like in middle school I went to a Jew academy, which is basically primarily African American and Hispanic. My brother and I are like, and then some another like Korean kid, or pretty much the only Asian kid in that school. So um, I make friends with those type of different background. So that's the way I grew up until I went to public school in high school.
Thank you for sharing. And can you share with us a little bit about how has your background influenced your involvement in the more social and racial justice side of the movements?
Um, well, based on my upbringing, I'm always like advocating, equal rights for everybody. Doesn't matter what nationality they are. I support everybody and their rights. And just experiencing, the injustice of Asian hate crime, it's kind of like hit home for me because it's kind of like how you see a movie and you just like thinking, oh wow, that's crazy. You never think that you be part of that movie, but now that you're part of the movie, it's very shocking to me. In fact, I'm furious about these Asian hate crime because personally, I lost all my grandparents already. I never got a chance to get to know them because all of them is in Vietnam. So I cherish any moment that I have with my grandma, and I appreciate anyone out there that is a grandma because they've gone through so much. Like war. Um, they have to endure a lot of things, and that age that they're in, they should not be discriminated like this. So to me, this is personal.
Yeah, that's very moving. And you also mentioned your grandma project. There's this project that you're working on, and you named it the Grandma Project. Is that if that's correct? And can you share with us a little bit about the stories?
So the Grandma Project is based on my homage to my last surviving grandma. She passed away in 2014. I was shocked and very, very sad about it because it's kind of way like, you know, you lose something that you really, really want and you can't do anything about it. So for me, of creating this project is to pay my respect to her and also just to share and show people that, you know, they really need to cherish their grandparents. My personal belief is that, and from my own culture as well, like I think there's right now there's a huge disconnection between the grandparent generation and the grandkids generation because there's no knowledge of transferring down from generation to generation. And there's a lot of value as far as respect, mannerism, the way you treat each other. It's all been diluted at this point. You know, in American society, um, once you become an adult, you get out the house, your parents move away, and your parents even far farther away. So there's a disconnect, and I think that's where, you know, people don't respect their grandparents as much as Asian American. So this project to me is very personal. Um, it's kind of a way for me to do something to honor my grandparents, even though they're no longer alive.
Yeah, that's very respectful, and thank you so much for bringing that. And I definitely resonate with you a lot on this. And since we're diving right into the topics of the hate crimes, especially what shook us all like 2 weeks ago is the shooting at in one of the Atlanta Chinatown massage parlors. Would you like to comment a little bit about that, as well as what do you define it to be as the authority in Atlanta trying to define it not as an hate crime?
Um, I mean, this is just that incident itself is just crazy because there's I think right now there's a lot of misplaced hatred that individual have, and they took it on someone else because, you know, it's kind of like going to school and then you got this bully. They don't like what's going on in their life, so they go out and they terrorize other people just to make themselves feel better. You know, it's kind of like that analogy of the crab in the bucket. You know, they're miserable, so they grab people, they put them down to their level, so they can feel normal. And I think that's what's going on right now. You know, there's people that miserable, and they making Asian American the scapegoat because we tend not to say anything. We just put a head down, quiet, you know, and anyone that are, you know, shy or introverted and don't have the voice to speak up for themselves, they're a perfect target.
Yeah, I totally agree that being less kind of loud as the other races sometimes can put us in a very huge disadvantage. And I also wonder, how would you compare the shooting of uh, the Chinatown massage parlors in 2 weeks ago compared to last June, the death of George Floyd, in terms of how they contributed to the rising conversations on racial justice and how they were handled by the media and the authorities?
You're asking how are they related?
How would you like to compare them, and how would you see the if in any case they're related or treated differently?
I think it go back to human understanding, really, because um, I think in any culture, in any nationality, you can be racist, including Asian American. If you growing up without, you know, making friends with other culture, you are probably bound into racist. Um, and I think it contributes to a lot of misunderstanding. Um, because the thing in reality, you know, we hate sometimes like we hate the thing that we fear. um, and not understanding each other, and not when you don't like, it's kind of like when you don't see a person as a human being, it's very easy to treat them like an animal. It's so easy. And with the incident going on, with both incident, I think, um, there's commonality of hate, there's commonality of misunderstanding, disregard and disrespect for human life, um, and who the victim is always being treated less than a human being. And I think that's kind of like the nature of hatred.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm also wondering, relating to your own experience or memories in growing up in Houston, have you at any point experienced any of the hate crimes in person, or to a friend or family, someone that is close to you?
It's funny that you asked me that question because when I was little, um, like there's people that discriminate me. They mock me because of my nationality. And then growing up as an adult, I also experienced discrimination within the Vietnamese community. Like it's more like they discriminate me because of the company that I work for, even though I'm Vietnamese. And I think that I think it go back to like how people they have their mind is so small that they don't like if you're not part of their clique, I would call it, then they don't care. They discriminate you even if you're Asian as well. So I experienced that personally, and there's this one different kind of discrimination as well. There's not just different color discriminate each other. That's we have the same race can discriminate each other. Prime example, we can be Asian and Asian, like for example, Chinese and Vietnamese or something, they can easily discriminate each other based on their history of war or different way of thinking, and that's already happening right now in our own community.
Yeah, totally. And I can definitely understand, even like within the same race, there's like different clans and tribes or regions that people would have prejudice against. That's also, you cannot like distinguish it, that because it also stems from the same root. And I'm also wondering, what are some of the potential stereotypes that might have contributed to the anti-Asian hate crimes in your view?
I think this go back to way when the first Chinese immigrant that came to the United States. Um, they built railroad. They didn't have much rights, and they've been treated unfairly. And just like the African American, they were treated fairly unfairly as well. So over time, that stereotype contribute to hate because we're taking away American jobs, or during the World War II, they discriminate Japanese American because the Japanese were attacking Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, and you know it's not just happened now, but every little thing add up, every little hate add up to anger, um, and anger can explode at any time. It's a time bomb, and that can you know it's kind of like what we've all been saying. Hate is a virus. It can infect you from generation to generation. It's a virus, and how do you cure anger? Is within all of us. So to do that, the only cure you can do is to have an understanding, to have a dialogue, to go out there and have a friend with different nationality. That's what I do with myself. I embrace different nationality. I understand Chinese culture, African American, Hispanic. I have friends that are Croatian, Albanian. You name it, I have it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And you brought up such an important topic about like racism stems from like lack of understanding and knowledge. And definitely, I feel like what we do here is also trying to openly communicate and break down that barrier of misunderstanding. So, what would you think is important for kids to learn about themselves in times like this? And especially witnessing the violence on the news, on the media. Uh, what is the most important thing to teach the kids?
I think at this day and age, we definitely need to teach kids. I think they're missing is a positive outlet to because everyone's angry, and especially kids when they're frustrated with their home or their environment, they don't have an outlet. I think kids need to learn about emotional intelligence. They need to learn maybe meditate, um, doing something positive. I think having a garden in school is very uh, very good for them because they need to understand about nurturing, about respect one another, um, having the ability to communicate with each other, learning about each other, and I think just positive outlet is I think it's a good medication for them because without a positive outlet, they're gonna use that energy for negative things.
Yeah, totally. And also, I understand that you joined the rally at the Discovery Green last Sunday to help document the moments where people are rallying and giving their voices to this very important movement. Could you tell us what you experienced and what you were trying to achieve out there in the rally?
My involvement in that movement was just for support, and I think with my camera, I can play a better support role in the rally. Um, for me, my purpose of being there is just to kind of like support the movement, and for me personally, is go back to the Grammar Project. I don't think any grammar out there should endure any kind of hate crime like that. Um, so it's I want to support the movement, and for that reason alone.
Yeah, totally. Like imagining anyone's close ones to be attacked like that, it's unbearable to think. So I'm also wondering, given this is so personal to you, and can you like share some of the like um, the way that you use photography? Like, how do you choose to use photography to be your kind of weapon or your tool in your documentary in archiving history?
So let me share my screen real quick, and then I can tell you more about it. So for me, excuse the little comment right here. So for me, I think especially for a movement like this, dealing with different nationality, from African American to Asian American to Hispanic, or to any nationality out there that have been discriminated, I think black and white photography play a very important role because, in my belief, if we just focus on a grandma, and a grandma doesn't know, if we just take out the her nationality, we can have the feeling of what that grandma could be. Because for me, love doesn't have color, and anybody can adopt a grandma, or a grandma can adopt somebody to love, or you can love someone that's not within your nationality. Um, so I use black and white photography in my grandma project to show, there's a connection there that extend beyond nationality, showing their character, showing, I call it, wisdom line. instead of, you see this wrinkle, I call them wisdom line, and just sharing their uniqueness. And it doesn't have to be Asian. I photograph everybody from different nationality as well.
Yeah,
Because
beautiful.
because grandma have their own story to tell.
Mm. Can I ask, how do you find all these people, and how did you approach them? Can you tell us a little bit about the process?
Um, the process is, I meet them on my personal day-to-day life, and I just ask them to photograph them, or sometimes I just do it without them asking, because I want to get their natural reaction. Um, and for me, it's kind of like, in the Asian culture, when a old person die, um, the the uh, the son or the daughter of that person would create like an altar for them, and this is kind of a way for me to offer them something they can use for an altar. So what I do is, I ask them, hey, let me photograph your grandma, and I'll give you a free copy. You can print it any size you want, and it's a way to honor your grandma, and it's also a way for me to honor my grandparents. Um, and I think it's very important in this day and age is to respect our elder, because we're missing that, um, especially in the United States. Um, and another thing too is that senior in the United States don't live long as senior in Asia. Why is that? And I think that contributes to diet, and primarily because they're not being respected like in Asia. In Asia, the senior or the pillar of the family, what they say goes, and you listen to them, you respect them, and they live longer because everyone loved them, everyone hang out with them, um, they talk to them, they don't send them to retirement home, all that. So it's I think this is a very unique subject, and I think having I think this project that I'm creating right now is, I think it can be a really good way to humanize um, everybody grandma, and when you think about it, how if the person that trying to harm someone else's grandma, if they can think about the person that they about to attack as their own grandma, then they would stop. If you can humanize that process, then they would stop. So I think art, it can be in any media, it can help contribute to the movement and stop the violence for Asian crime.
Yeah, that's such a thoughtful, and I'm amazed how the level of process you went into, and also just thinking about the many of the people who were attacked were actually like were very elderly, like old women, and it's amazing to see like people seeing like elderly women like grandmas as the people they would choose to attack, and those people, it's like I would think this way your project definitely has a very very strong voice to exert that 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 yeah, important to respect the elderly and seeing them as your own. So yeah, thank you and kudos to the project that you're doing.
Yeah,
um,
thank you. And I also want to mention, majority of these grandparents, they don't speak English well. So I think it's all of us responsibility to speak on their behalf and to protect them and to defend them. So it's an honor for me to do this and to share what I believe with everybody.
Yeah, totally. And so behind the scenes with the your subject or the subject as they are the grandmas, how do you approach them? Do you kind of chit chat with them to get to know their stories as well as working with them on this photography work?
for me, I'm trying to get them as much comfortable as possible. I try to tell them, if this is your last photograph, how do you want to be photographed? And I just ask them, just be themselves and um, think of how they want to be remembered as a person, as a human being. And I try to capture the essence of a person. And that's kind of like my process. And then the second process is for me to edit. And I think the edit part is very critical as well because I have to kind of like enhancing their feature, their emotion, their personality, everything, every small little thing about their photograph. Um, and to allow that, it's kind of like putting my spirit into that photograph and then let that photograph come to life and allow the viewer to have their interpretation of that person. And without the color, I think it really add in the emotional connection by allowing, because people have their own emotion, and when you take out the color and allow people to interpret what it is using their own emotion, I think that's a really good way to connect with people.
Yeah, totally. I'm amazed at the way you were able to capture their eyes and then the lighting and that reflects on their wrinkles or the wisdom lights. Um, how do you use these to tell a story, for example? Like, how did you compose the composition and the picture, the framing?
Sometimes it's just on luck, but a lot of time too is about um, I want to say, because you have to really have a connection with the subject and for them to feel comfortable um, and communicating with them. Um, and I think it got a lot to do with training as well because it took me years to learn about photography, um, using different lens, but all that is just technique. Ultimately, it's just between you and the subject, how you communicate what you want out of them, how you make them feel comfortable, natural, and then capturing the right moment. Because they say a picture uh, worth 1,000 words. So how do you put 1,000 words in the picture? So you kind of like working backward. Um, and then sometimes I'm a little bit conflicted with some of the photograph of the subject because in one angle they look good, and then in another angle they look good too. But how do you pick the right one for the audience to see that one picture? And sometimes I'm conflicted with that as well. Um, and then kind of like picking what's photographs say the most about this person. So sometimes I do get conflicted picking the best photograph as well. Um, and it's just a combination of every little thing that you learn through photography.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm also really intrigued that you had subjects that are not Asian American, uh, who can be any other race. But with the black and white lens, you are it's not obvious what skin color they are. So do you have like a message behind that?
Yeah. Um, so let me go back to one of my photographs. This is one you haven't seen yet. Let me share this one real quick. So, this is one of my personal story. So this lady right here, her name is Diane Jolly. She's a really good friend of mine, and we're in the same organization called Rotary International together. And I asked her to be my subject, and she's agreed to it. She's about 85 around there, and she's actually one of my photographs in the exhibit for my grandma project. And I'd invite her to the exhibit, and she brought a friend with her. She's also a friend of mine as well. And they came. I was very happy that they came because they want to support me. And then afterward, I realized something that I didn't realize when I started this project 10 years ago. Um, this project is called a grammar project, but for me personally, I didn't understand the meaning behind it when I started it. But for me personally, it's it's kind of like this thing where I was looking for someone to call grandma, because when I was growing up, I never had the opportunity to call anyone grandma. So having the ability, kind of like reaching out to find someone that, that you can call grandma, I think that's very meaningful for me. So after getting, um, after the show, I had a talk with her, and I realized the reason the reason I was doing this project, and I told her about it, and she said, she's more than happy to kind of like adopt me to be her grandson and allow me to call her grandma. So I was very touched and moved and happy about that. So for me, it's not about nationality when it comes to grandma. It's about respecting the spirit of a grandma.
Wow, that's absolutely heartwarming and super touching. And now I can't imagine how many grandmas you will be able to have now, like after this project, and linking that to your own experience is really really fascinating. Um, and I guess that's all of my questions. Do you have anything else you would like to add in regards to either your words for the anti-Asian hate crimes and the people out there, that any message you want to leave in the time capsule?
Um, I just think that we need to really understand each other as a citizen of the United States. We are a melting pot, and in order to become a melting pot, we need to understand each other. We need to respect one another. We need to learn about each other, because there's a lot of things we need to learn about each other. Um, we can share culture with each other. We have different food here in Houston. We are the biggest city that contain a lot of different nationality. So in order for us to live together, we need to create a bridge and understanding each other. Is the only way for us to live.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Mr. Wen.
Thank you, Anne.